Hello everyone, welcome back. This is part 3 of our Linux for Beginner series. If you have followed the part 1 and part 2, in part 1 and part 2, I just touched base on the fundamentals of Linux and few must know Linux commands. This one, I will deep dive on the file system and file management. How do you really deal with the file ownerships, groups, and etc. Now, before starting the video, if you haven't seen my previous videos, I'm Sushil. I have more than a decade of industry experience and I'm a cloud certified cloud architect and a DevOps expert. I also have a bunch of other Azure certifications. I'm passionate about fitness and technology, and I share my knowledge using the techguy.in. So let's, before starting the video, I'll give you the brief background on what we covered so far and what our next videos will cover. This I've done in part 1 and part 2 also. Part 1 was just the introduction about Linux, what Linux really is, why we use Linux, etc. Part 2, we touched base on command line interface. There are a few commands that anyone who is planning to learn Linux or who's planning to work on Linux, there are a few commands that I think everyone should be aware of. In part 2, we just touched based on that. This one, we will deep dive on the file system, the users, groups, file ownership, etc. Next one, we will then talk about the package management and software installation. How do you really deal with the packages? Fifth, we'll deep dive on the process management and system monitoring. Sixth, we will talk about networking, and eventually in the last, we will talk about the shell scripting and automation. Now, before wasting more time, this video is about Linux file system and file management, as I already mentioned. First of all, what really is Linux file system? What really is Linux file system? Or in fact, what is a file system? Now, if you do not really know what file system is not specific to Linux. It is an operating system concept. File system is something that defines how your files are stored, how your files are managed on your machine. In Windows, you have FAT, you have right NTFS file systems. Similarly, in Linux, you have ext, you have vfat, you have ext for hpfs, FreeBSD, etc. So you have different file systems in Linux. You'll not really deal a lot with the file systems, but I felt you should at least know what file systems are, because file system really defines the fundamental way of storing files on your machine. But this is something that you should really know. In Linux, we call it as a file system hierarchy standard. The structure, this is what it uses. What I mean by that is, I'll show you in the lab also. But in Linux, it is really a hierarchical method. The root is the parent directory, and under root you have different child directories, and under those directories you have then different directories or folders, etc. So it is really managed in a hierarchical method. Root is the parent directory, also denoted as /, which is a top level directory, and then you have bunch of different child directories. The user a USR is the user related programs, which has libraries and documentation. I'll deep dive and talk about this in detail just after this slide, but I just wanted to talk what these individual folder mean. USR contains your libraries and documentation, really the user related programs. Bin, as the name suggests, binaries and commands, it is essentially the soft link of USR bin. So bin is under USR actually. etc is your configuration files, all the configuration, network, user account, startup scripts, kernel, etc. Host name, host files, DNS, all the configuration are under etc. Home, when a user is created, you can create users with the home directory or not. Again, depends on how you really want to do it. But home really has the home directory, corresponding directory of the nh user. by default the user will have read write permissions and will be the owner of that of its individual home directory. Temp, as the name suggests, temp directory, which is usually cleared after the system reboot, so do not store anything in temp, which is really critical. What I really store in temp are my temporary scripts or anything that I'm really doing as a lab and which I do not really care about, so I store in temp so that it's cleared when my system is rebooted. Var has your variable data, which means your logs, temporary files, etc. Now, I really believe in practical. And now let me show you what I really meant is, first of all, this one I touched in my previous section. DF you can use to check your mount points and everything. This is what I meant. My root, I have 29 GB. My hard disk is really 30 GB, 32 GB in fact. This is the route that I was talking about. And if I want to check my directory, what I think I'm in home. Okay, let me change. If I want to change to root, I use cd / I go to my parent directory, or sorry, root directory. And tree also I touched in my previous section. Using tree, this is what I wanted to show you. Tree, I mean, this is how you can check, but I can also use ls. If you remember, ls, these are the directories that I was talking about, right? And these are the directories that I was talking about. USR, user related. Now let me show you USR. Okay, again, as I mentioned, bin, I'll talk about later, but these are all the libraries and the files. For example, if I show you LSR, USR, lib, for example. So these are all my libraries, for example, Python library, or for example, my ManDB. I talked about man in my previous video. LSB, for example, again, ls, usr, bin, lsb. Oh, sorry. Why? Maybe I do not have permission. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I was using user bin. It's not user bin. It's user lib, right? User lib and lsb. Uh, init functions, these are called when the startup happens. But let me show you something that you will really relate to. Okay, for example kernel. Okay, or for example grub, uh, or let's check kernel. Okay, kernel. uh, these are all the libraries that are called when you are running system daemon. Sudo is my library, ssl is my library. Similarly, I will have ssh also probably in this same folder. Open ssh, these are libraries, right? So usr really has all the user libraries and documentation. Then we talk about bin. For example, bin. What I want to show you is, if I show you ls-al, and let's do this. So if you really see, my bin is okay. Whatever you see here, I mentioned in my previous video. D means D and directory wherever you do not have, because these are all directories wherever you do not have D. For example, uh, mm, 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 or maybe later. Oh, okay. Var, for example, var. Wherever you do not see D are the files. Okay. So wherever you see L now, wherever you see L is the soft link. So my bin is essentially soft link of usr bin. So when I talk about the bin directory, it is actually usr bin, but by default a soft link is created in my root. So what bin really has, my bin has all the binaries. These are all binaries that you will see. For example, sleep, right? I mean, if you have not, we can use sleep command to whenever I'm using scripting, I can use sleep to wait. I can use cat. I can use who am I to find out which user. For example, who am I? These are all binaries. Who am I to find out who is logged in, or maybe cron tab. I can use cron tab to see if I have anything. Let me cancel. So these are all binaries that you will really see install SSH. These are all binaries. So USR bin, sorry, the bin has all the binaries. Similarly, my ATC has all the configuration files. For example, host file. If you know host file is kind of a local DNS, or I can add the host directories in this. Resolve.conf is really where we store our DNS configuration. So for example, cat etc resolve.conf, it is really my DNS file. I mean, if I don't know if they really type it here, but this is really the DNS, for example, my name server and all that. Or for example, cat etc hosts. So these hosts etc are my host file. Or for example, kernel also will be somewhere. Anyway, so this etc is where you have all your configuration files, and the temp, as I already mentioned, will have all my temporary files which will be deleted. These are all defined temporary files which you do not really care about. Now var is where we have our variable files. So all the logs, for example, my log, my backups, my cache and everything. For example, if I do log, in this I will have all my system logs. Now this is a Linux, this is a Windows Azure machine. That is why I have a guest agent. Then I have my system logs, I have my dpkg logs, I have my auth logs, and all those logs I can really see in my, and whatever you see, the numbering is because there is a cap on the size. So whenever it reaches a certain size, it zips it, I mean it truncates, and then starts writing new log in the current one. So if you do not really see anything in this file, you can probably check the previous one. If not, then you can go back and check the other files as well. So this is what the file system is, and what different directories or paths mean. Next, I want to talk about the user accounts and groups in Linux. You can really use user add. See, add is to add, mod is to modify, del is to delete. So similarly, group add, group mod, and group delete. And then you have different parameters, and then you can use different commands to check the user and group information. Now, if I want to add a user in Linux, I just can use, for example, I'm adding a user called user add sush. Now I can use user add to add this user. Now, for example, if I want to change password for this user, I can use password sush, and let me set a password. Okay, and I can really now change my user to sush. Now, for example, now if I want to add a user, can I do it? I can't. Previously, why I was able to do it is because I was logged in as root. Root by default has permission to create users. Right now, I'm logged in as this user, and this user does not really have permission to add users, right? So and whenever you're trying to do all these commands, all these changes, your account should really have permissions to create or to make those changes. So you can use user add to do this. Now I can also use user delete to delete my user. Why it's not letting me do it? Because I'm logged in as that user. So let me exit from this user, and I can use user del and my user is deleted. So I can use all these commands. I can use user mod also, and then if I want to see what parameters there are, for example, I want to add a comment for this, or I want to add a name and all those things. So I can really change. I can add a group. I will show you right now. Now for example, let me do this. I create a user, sush, and I create a group. I can similarly use group add developer. Okay, now I want to, for example, I do id sush. My user social. So every user is part of, can be part of a group or multiple groups also. Now by default, when a user is created, a user gets a user id, group id. Group id is my group. So it by default a user will create its own group also. So my user sush has its own group also. Now if I want to change my user, or I want to add my user to this particular group, what I can do is user mod hyphen a is to add, append to group, and which group? Developer. Okay. Why up, sorry, I can use message. Why? Oh, okay. Now if I do id, you see now my user sush is part of group sush also, and developer also. So I can really change or add a user on my group, and I can do all those things user using or for example, now if I want to edit my group, I can use group mod. And let's see, first of all, what all options do we really have. I can change my group name. Okay, now I change group mod hyphen n, um group mod hyphen n, and let's do this. New developer. And okay, now let's do this. See, so why do I really need group? Because I create a group and I add my user to the group, and now I do not really have to manage user individually. I can just make changes or add changes or assign permissions. I can do anything with the group, and it applies to all the users by default. That is the whole funda of using groups and users. And you can really change or modify this using these commands. And if I want to change details, check details, I can really use id sush, tells me all the details. If I want more details, I can use sush, tells me this is my user, this is my directory, the user never logged in because I deleted and I created again, and shell. Okay, let me show you this now. I want to add my user with certain details. Okay, and I do it using, for example, let me show you this example. I'm just checking what example do I want. Let me show you this example where I want to add a user, or let me change my user. My user name I will change. For example, the C, I want to add a comment, and I will add Sushil, and my username, and I want to shell. So I want to also change the shell also. For example, I'll just change shell to bin sh, and what is my username? Sush. Now if I do finger sush, you see my bin is changed, my name is changed. So I can really use user mode to change all these things. Now if I want to show you, sorry, I do sush, my user is now logged in the shell. And let me do this, and such. Now if you see, I'm logged in, my default shell is the bash shell. So that is one thing. Or if you really want more details, you, as I mentioned, etc has all the configuration files, so I can really check etc password, for example, for all the users. I can I created sush, right? My home directory is this, my bash is this is my this thing, this is my user id, this is my group. So I can use etc password to check details. I can also use etc groups, etc group for all my groups. So I have all these groups. For example, I think I'll have the developer also. This is my new group that I created, and my group id is this, and these are all the users who are part of this group. So is there anything else that I'm missing? No. So you can use these commands to check everything or deal with the users and groups. Next thing that I want to talk about is the permissions and ownership, because this is something that is really critical and you must know. Now, let me first of all show you this, and then you'll be able to relate with these things. Okay. Now, these things, this is where you see what the ownership is and everything. Now, this is who is the, or how you will be able to understand better is, let me show you this. -al. Okay. Now, if you see, I have a user called Jenkins because I have Jenkins installed on this machine. This folder, this directory, owner is Jenkins and the group is Jenkins. I mean, this group is the owner or has the permission. What I'll talk what the permission is. For example, this folder has all this and this folder. So this is who the owner is, and this talks what the group is, and then these are the permissions. So what this really means is, this tells you, if, as I already mentioned, this tells you if it is a directory, if it is a file, if it is a soft link. These three talks about what are the permissions for the user. When I say user, this user, what are the permissions for this user? This tells what are the permissions for the group, this group, and what are the permission, and these three tells what are the permission of other. So it's not necessary that only the user and group is accessing, the other people are also trying to access that particular folder or file, right? So this is what this really means. For example, this one. So my owner has read, write, and execute permission. My group only has read and execute, does not have write permission. Others have read and execute permission. Now let me deep dive on this. That is what it means. R read, W write, X execute. Right. So R is 1, W is sorry. Second. This is what it is. First is owner, second is group, third is the others. I can also use U, G, or O. Now, how do I mean, I talked about etc password and etc group, who owns and all that. Now, chmod is the command that you use to assign or change the modify the ownership or the permissions. Now there are two ways. You can either use numeric or you can use symbolic. I am not really good with all these numbers. I tend to miss. I use symbolic representation. But what it really means is, if you want to assign the read permission, you use 4. Write is 2. Execute is 1. For symbolic, it's pretty simple. Read is R, write is W, X, execute is X. Now if you want to add a certain permission, you use plus. If you want to edit or remove a certain permission, you use remove, and is equal to is to set. Now U is for user, G is for group, and O is for other, and A is for all. Now for example, there is a file called file1, and I want to assign read, write, and execute. Now if you see read, write, and execute, read 4, write 2, execute 1. So 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. So if I want to assign all the permissions to the user, what is first? User. So if I want to assign all the permissions to the user, I use 7. Now the second is group. Now what I do is 6. What is 6? Read plus write. 4 plus 2 is 6. Now for the group, I assign read and write. My others do not have an execute permission. When I say execute, there might be scripts that need some sort of execution. So they cannot execute anything. They can write files, they can modify, they can read, but they cannot really execute anything from that particular directory. And for other users, what I want to do is other users, I want to add read and execute permission but not write anything. So others will have read and execute permission on file 1. Now if you really want to do using numeric representation, you can do something like this. But if you want to do it using symbolic representation, you can use my user or owner will get read, write and execute permission. R is read and W is write, execute permission. So I'm giving my user on this particular directory read, write and execute permission. Or if I want to give user, group and others read permission, I can also use UGO plus R. I can use RWX and etc. So D is directory, read is write, R is read, W is write, X is execute, R is for write is 2, X is 1. So that is how you really deal. Now you do not really have to memorize this because it's pretty simple. Now if you do not want the user to give any permission, you will use 0. If you just want to give only execute, because X is 1, you give 1. If you want to give only write, 0 1 0, etc etc etc. Now let me give you a simple example. If I want to, for example, I create my user with I have my the root, or for example on this one on SUSHB. Okay, so let me show you this. Let me so if you see, since I was talking, let me change to for SUSH. Now this one I see, or let me do this chmod. Or first of all, let me change the ownership. Okay, SUSH, SUSH and SUSH. So what I'm essentially doing, I'm changing. So right now I see for SUSH my owner and group is root. I'm changing owner and group to SUSH. Why? You'll realize, you'll just see it just now. Now for this, my owner is SUSH and group is also SUSH. Now my owner has read, write, execute all the permissions. Now let me change this, and for owner I remove write and execute permission. Okay, or let me just remove the, or let me remove write also, and I do this. Now if you see SUSH, what I did, I used for others. I want to use for this, and if you see my user doesn't only has the read permission right now. Now if I change my user to SUSH, because my owner is SUSH. Oh, I already did. I already changed the permission to SUSH. Now why? Why is all permission denied? Because I do not really have write and all that. But now I'm logged in as SUSH. Okay. And if I try to go to SUSH, I do not really have any permission on this folder because I removed all the permission. Now let me exit and chmod. Let me do let's do all the permission on SUSH. Okay, now if I do lsal, you see in this, because what I did, if I see 7 was maximum, right? So for user also I gave read, write, execute. For group also I gave read write execute. For others also I gave read write execute. Now if I do cd or I do sush, now you see I do not see permission here because that user already have all the permissions. Now I do cd sush, I can check I am in home sush, and I, let's see, I do test. So now I have all the permission. This is how I really change the permissions. Now if I do this, I have this permission, right? I have all the permission. So that is how you really change the permission, or you really change the owner, or add permissions, or assign permissions, and etc. Now we have already done all this mkdir lscp, but I just wanted to um, briefly touch base on this because in this lab I wanted to show RMs for remove, MP, and all these things. So, what are the best practices? Whenever you are creating a file or folder or anything, you should really use all the meaningful and descriptive names so that anybody who checks those folder or who really tries to browse understands what that file and folder is essentially for, and if they should keep it or delete it. You should also regularly back up all the important files because, as I told, at least temp removes everything, but there are certain scenarios where you might lose your data if it is not stored properly, or there is any corruption or anything. Yeah, as a best practice, for all the critical data should be regularly backed up, and be very precautious when you're using RM and RMDIR, because there have been scenarios where somebody removed important or crucial files, and then there was a loss, financial and reputation as well. And since I showed you all the permissions, if you are really want to assign permissions, you should not really assign all the permissions. There is minimum privilege funda, which means you should only assign permissions which is really required. If a user has to have a read permission, the user should only have read permission, not write and execute. If a user only needs write permission, and the user should not really have execute permission. So be very careful when you're assigning permissions on a particular file and folder. So what we really talked about, we talked about hierarchical structure, we talked about file permission and ownership, we talked about the management and the best practice. I hope this video helped. If there is anything else that you want me to cover, please feel free to write down in the comment section. And I hope you have a good day. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.